Jake inhaled the crisp mountain air, feeling the tension in his shoulders dissolve with each step. The late afternoon sun draped the rugged landscape in gold, casting long shadows through the towering pines. His golden retriever, Max, bounded ahead, paws kicking up loose dirt as he chased after unseen scents. The dog was in his element, ears perked, tail wagging, energy boundless. "You're showing off now, aren't you?" Jake chuckled, wiping sweat from his brow. They had been hiking for hours, weaving through narrow trails that cut deep into the wilderness. This was their tradition: one man, one dog, and miles of untamed nature. Max stopped suddenly, ears twitching. His gaze locked onto something beyond the trees, his stance rigid. "What is it, buddy?" Jake slowed his pace. The woods had a way of playing tricks on the mind, filling the silence with imagined movement. He followed Max's line of sight but saw nothing, just a wall of green, dense and impenetrable. Then Max took off. "Max, wait!" But the dog was already gone, weaving through the trees with an urgency that sent a chill through Jake's spine. He sprinted after him, ducking under low branches and leaping over exposed roots. His breath came in sharp bursts, heart pounding against his ribs. And then Max stopped. He stood at the edge of a shallow stream, panting, his golden fur bristling. The water shimmered, reflecting the last light of day, but something about it seemed off. It was too still, its surface too smooth, as though holding its breath. Jake bent down, placing a hand on Max's back. The dog was tense, his muscles coiled beneath his damp fur. Then, without hesitation, Max lowered his head and lapped at the water. "Hey, maybe don't," Jake started, but it was too late. Max's tail swayed lazily as he drank, his body relaxing. Whatever had startled him before seemed forgotten. Jake exhaled, shaking his head. "You scared me, buddy." Max turned to him, tongue lolling, eyes bright with the simple joy of a dog on an adventure. Jake ruffled his fur, letting out a quiet laugh. The moment passed, and the world returned to normal, or so it seemed. They continued on, but something had shifted. Max, usually eager to lead, now stayed closer to Jake's side. His steps were slower, his tail lower. 10 minutes later, he stumbled. Jake barely registered it at first, a slight misstep on uneven ground. But then it happened again. Max's legs trembled, his breathing ragged. "Max!" Jake's voice sharpened. He crouched beside him, running a hand over his body. His fur was damp with sweat, his heartbeat too fast. Then, as if the ground had been pulled from beneath him, Max collapsed. Jake's stomach lurched. He pressed his fingers against Max's chest, feeling the erratic thud of his heart. His breaths were short, uneven. "No, no, no, stay with me, buddy." Panic surged through Jake's veins. He reached for his phone, no signal. Of course. They were miles from civilization, deep in the wilderness. He glanced around, searching for options. He had two choices: stay put and hope for help that wouldn't come, or carry Max and pray he could reach the nearest ranger station in time. Jake hoisted Max into his arms. He wasn't a small dog, his weight pressed against Jake's chest, muscles screaming in protest, but there was no hesitation. He ran. The forest blurred around him. His lungs burned, his legs threatened to buckle, but he didn't stop. The only thing that mattered was the faint rise and fall of Max's chest against his own. The sky darkened. Shadows stretched long, swallowing the trail. Each step felt heavier, each breath a struggle. Jake gritted his teeth, forcing his body forward. Then, movement ahead. A figure emerged from the trees, stepping onto the path. A woman, mid-30s, dressed in outdoor gear, her dark hair pulled into a loose ponytail. She saw Jake, her eyes flicking to the limp dog in his arms. "What happened?" Her voice was sharp with urgency. "He just collapsed," Jake gasped. "I don't know what's wrong." The woman took one look at Max and snapped into action. "I'm a vet. There's a clinic about 2 miles from here. We need to go, now." Jake didn't question it. He followed her, every ounce of his strength focused on keeping Max close. As they moved, the vet glanced at Max's still form, something unreadable in her expression. "What's your name?" she asked. "Jake." She nodded. "I'm Dr. Evelyn Carter. And whatever's happening to your dog, it's not normal." A chill slithered down Jake's spine. He didn't know it yet, but this night was only the beginning. Jake sprinted after Dr. Evelyn Carter, his arms cradling Max's limp body against his chest. Every step sent jolts of pain through his legs, but he couldn't stop. Max's breaths were shallow, his golden fur damp with sweat. Panic gnawed at Jake's resolve, but he pushed forward, his only focus on reaching the clinic. Evelyn moved with urgency, her headlamp slicing through the growing darkness. The dense forest seemed to close in around them, the rustling of leaves and distant calls of nocturnal creatures barely registering in Jake's mind. "We're almost there," Evelyn called over her shoulder. Jake barely heard her. His pulse thundered in his ears, drowning out everything but the rhythmic thud of his footsteps and Max's ragged breathing. Then, through the trees, a sliver of artificial light appeared, a single illuminated sign flickering in the night. Summit Ridge Veterinary Clinic. Relief crashed over Jake, but he didn't slow. He surged toward the glass doors, kicking them open with his shoulder. Evelyn rushed ahead, clearing a metal table in the center of the sterile, brightly lit room. "Put him here," she ordered. Jake lowered Max onto the table, his hands trembling. The golden retriever's body was frighteningly still, only the faint rise and fall of his ribs proving he was still alive. Evelyn wasted no time. She grabbed a stethoscope, pressing it to Max's chest. Her brows furrowed. His heartbeats irregular. Breathings shallow. She moved quickly, inserting an IV line into Max's leg and attaching a monitor. The beeping sound filled the space, an erratic, unsteady rhythm. "What's wrong with him?" Jake's voice cracked. Evelyn's jaw tightened. "That's what I'm trying to find out." She grabbed a syringe, drew a small amount of Max's blood, and slid it into a diagnostic machine. "We'll have preliminary results in a few minutes." Jake ran a hand through his damp hair, pacing the small clinic. His stomach twisted as he watched Max's still form. Just hours ago, he had been full of energy, racing through the trees, tail wagging. Now, he looked fragile, as if something had drained the life from him. "What do you think happened?" Jake asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Evelyn hesitated. "You said he drank from a stream, right?" Jake nodded. Her gaze darkened. "That could be it. Contaminated water, toxins, but this," she gestured to the monitor, "this doesn't look like normal poisoning." A sudden, sharp beep from the machine cut through the air. Evelyn turned to the screen, her eyes scanning the result. The color drained from her face. "That's impossible." Jake's heart slammed against his ribs. What is it?" Evelyn didn't answer immediately. She pulled the screen closer, as if trying to make sense of what she was seeing. Finally, she looked up, her expression a mixture of disbelief and fear. "His blood, it's changing." Jake's breath hitched. "What do you mean, changing?" Evelyn swallowed hard. "There's something in his system, something I've never seen before. His red blood cells are mutating at an abnormal rate. It's almost like," she trailed off, shaking her head. "Like what?" Jake pressed. She exhaled sharply. "Like something is rewriting his DNA." Jake stared at her, his mind struggling to grasp the words. "That doesn't make any sense." "I know," Evelyn said. "But look at this." She pointed to the screen, where complex molecular structures were displayed. "This isn't normal. It's as if," she hesitated, searching for the right words, "his blood is adapting to something." The air in the room seemed to thicken. Jake felt a cold weight settle in his chest. "Adapting to what?" Evelyn shook her head. "I don't know. But whatever it is, it started after he drank from that stream." Jake's thoughts raced. That moment, when Max had paused at the water's edge, his body tense, what had he sensed? Had he known something was wrong? A soft whimper drew Jake's attention back to the table. Max stirred, his eyelids fluttering. His breathing was still shallow, but he was conscious. Max! Jake rushed to his side, his hands resting gently on the dog's fur. Max's eyes opened halfway, his gaze unfocused. Then, something strange happened. His pupils dilated unnaturally wide, swallowing the warm brown of his irises. His body trembled, his muscles tensing. And then, in a motion too fast for a sick dog, his head snapped toward Jake's arm. Teeth bared. Jake barely had time to react before Max lunged. A flash of fangs. A sharp snap in the air. Then, just as suddenly, Max collapsed back onto the table, his body going limp once more. Jake stumbled backward, his heart pounding. He looked at Evelyn, his chest heaving. What the hell was that? Evelyn's hands were gripping the edge of the table, her knuckles white. She shook her head slowly, her eyes never leaving Max's unmoving form. I don't know, she whispered. But something is very, very wrong. Silence settled between them, heavy and suffocating. Then, outside, a distant howl echoed through the night. Low. Haunting. Unnatural. Jake turned toward the door, dread curling in his stomach. Something was out there. And whatever had affected Max, it wasn't just in his blood. Evelyn barely breathed as she checked Max's vitals. The monitors continued their erratic beeping, charting a pattern she couldn't explain. Jake stood motionless, still reeling from what had just happened. His best friend, his loyal, gentle Max, had snapped at him with a ferocity he had never seen before. Evelyn pulled off her gloves, her fingers trembling. Jake, she said carefully, I need you to tell me exactly where that stream was. Every detail. Jake dragged a hand down his face, trying to steady himself. It was about 3 miles up the ridge, near a clearing where the trees thin out. The water looked normal. Max drank for a few seconds, then stopped, like he sensed something. But I thought he was just distracted. Evelyn's gaze darkened. If that water was contaminated with something, we need to know what. Jake's pulse pounded. We're not talking about a bacteria or a parasite, are we? Evelyn shook her head. No. This is something else. She hesitated before adding, something unnatural. The words sent a chill down Jake's spine. He looked at Max's still body. The golden retriever had always been strong, full of life. But now, his muscles twitched sporadically, his fur damp with sweat. It was as if something inside him was evolving. A sudden, sharp knock at the clinic's front door made them both jump. Jake turned, his body instinctively tensing. It was nearly midnight. The clinic was isolated, miles away from town. Who would be out here now? Evelyn wiped her hands on her scrubs and stepped toward the door, peering through the small window. A man stood outside, his face partially obscured by the shadows. He wore a dark jacket, his posture rigid. Evelyn hesitated before unlocking the door. The moment it swung open, the man spoke in a low, urgent tone. You have the dog, he said. Not a question. A statement. Jake stepped forward, instantly on edge. Who the hell are you? The man's eyes flicked toward him, sharp and assessing. Then he reached into his jacket, slowly, and pulled out an ID card, flashing it just long enough for Evelyn to see. Dr. Samuel Harding, he said. I work with the CDC. Evelyn's brow furrowed. The CDC? Harding nodded. We've been monitoring reports of unusual activity in this region. Dogs collapsing. Wildlife behaving erratically. We've been tracking something for weeks. He glanced past her, his gaze landing on Mac. His expression hardened. And from what I just heard, you've found it. Jake narrowed his eyes. Found what? Harding exhaled, choosing his words carefully. Something's in that water. Something we don't fully understand yet. We believe it's a biological agent, possibly extraterrestrial in origin. Silence. Jake stared at him. You're saying this is alien? Harding didn't blink. I'm saying we've seen patterns like this before. And every time, it points to something we can't explain. Evelyn folded her arms. If you've been tracking this, Why haven't we heard about it? Harding's jaw tightened. Because it doesn't stay in one place long enough. Whatever this is, it moves, it spreads, and it adapts. He stepped inside, closing the door behind him. We need to test the dog. Jake instinctively placed himself between Max and Harding. He's not some lab rat. Harding met his gaze evenly. If we don't figure this out, more animals, and possibly people, will be affected. He turned to Evelyn. You already know something's off. This isn't just a toxin. Evelyn hesitated. As much as she hated to admit it, he was right. Max's blood was changing at an impossible rate. It was rewriting itself. But for what purpose? She exhaled. What do you need? Harding pulled out a small black case, opening it to reveal a series of advanced-looking vials and syringes. A fresh sample of his blood. And I need to see his reaction to ultraviolet light. Jake's stomach twisted. Why UV? Harding didn't answer. Instead, he pulled out a small, high-powered UV flashlight. He flicked it on, the eerie purple glow illuminating the clinic walls. Then, he turned it toward Max. The second the light hit the dog's fur, Max twitched violently. His muscles rippled, a low growl rumbling deep in his throat. The golden strands of his coat shimmered under the UV, revealing faint, glowing vein-like patterns running beneath his skin. Evelyn gasped. Oh my God! Jake stumbled backward. What is that? Harding's face remained unreadable. Proof. Max's growls intensified, his body convulsing. Then, his eyes snapped open. They weren't brown anymore. They were glowing. A deep, unnatural blue. And in that instant, Jake realized something horrifying. Max wasn't just changing. He was becoming something else. Max's glowing eyes locked onto Jake, and for the first time in their years together, Jake felt something he never expected: fear. His best friend, the dog he had raised since a pup, was no longer the same. His muscles flexed unnaturally beneath his shimmering fur, his breath coming in short, erratic bursts. Evelyn took an instinctive step back. Jake, he's not stable. Max let out a low, guttural growl. But there was something more than aggression in his stance. There was confusion. His body trembled, his head twitching slightly as though two forces were battling inside him. Harding didn't hesitate. He pulled out a syringe from his case and moved toward Max. We need to sedate him, now. Jake's instincts screamed at him to intervene. No, wait! But before he could move, Max lunged. It happened in a blur. Max's body arced through the air, his jaws inches from Harding's arm. Harding barely managed to dodge, rolling to the side as the syringe clattered to the floor. Max hit the ground but spun around with inhuman speed, his glowing eyes burning with something wild and uncontrollable. Jake's heart pounded. Max, stop! For the briefest moment, Max hesitated. His ears twitched at Jake's voice. His body trembled as if trying to hold himself back. But the thing inside him was winning. Evelyn grabbed a tranquilizer gun from the emergency kit. Jake, move. But before she could take the shot, Max bolted. He moved with terrifying speed, crashing through the clinic door in a splintering explosion of wood and glass. The night swallowed him whole. Jake was already running after him. Max! But the forest had already taken him. They searched for hours. Evelyn, Harding, and Jake moved through the dense trees with flashlights cutting through the darkness. The air was thick with the damp scent of earth and pine, but the silence was unnatural. The forest was empty, no birds, no rustling leaves, as if everything else had fled. Harding checked his scanner, a high-tech device that hummed softly, detecting biological anomalies. He's still close, he muttered. But he's changing. Jake's fists clenched. I don't care what's happening to him. I'm getting my dog back. Evelyn hesitated before speaking. Jake, what if he's not your dog anymore? Jake whipped around, his face set like stone. I don't give a damn what you or Harding think. Max is my family. I won't abandon him. Before Evelyn could respond, a deep, resonant howl shattered the night. It wasn't the howl of a dog. It was something else, and it was close. Harding raised his gun. Get ready. From the darkness, glowing blue eyes emerged. Not just one pair. 4. Jake's breath hitched. Oh my God! They stepped forward, their bodies familiar yet grotesquely altered. Max stood at the front, his fur pulsating with the eerie, glowing veins. But behind him, 2 other creatures followed, wild coyotes, now sharing the same unnatural transformation. Evelyn whispered, "It's spreading." Max let out another growl, but this time, Jake heard something different beneath it. A plea. A struggle. "Max," Jake said softly, stepping forward. "I know you're in there, buddy." Max's body twitched violently. His muscles seized. His glowing eyes flickered, just for a second, as though the dog inside was fighting to resurface. Harding aimed his gun. "If he attacks, we take him down." "No!" Jake shoved Harding's arm aside. But it was too late. The coyotes lunged. Gunfire erupted. Evelyn screamed as chaos exploded around them. The coyotes moved like lightning, their bodies adapting, shifting unnaturally mid-motion. Harding fired, taking one down, but the other dodged, leaping at Evelyn. Jake had no time to think. He threw himself forward, tackling her out of the way. Max snarled. But then, he turned on the other creature. In an instant, Max launched himself at the remaining coyote, his powerful jaws clamping down on its throat. The infected beast let out a choked screech, thrashing, but Max held firm. His muscles rippled, glowing patterns surging violently, and then, in one final motion, he ripped the creature apart. For a moment, silence. Max stood panting, his glowing eyes meeting Jake's. His body shuddered, the infection raging within him. Jake knew what was coming. His best friend was still fighting. But he wouldn't last much longer. Tears burned Jake's eyes as he stepped toward him. "Max!" Max let out a low whimper. His legs wobbled. The light inside him flickered, then pulsed brighter. Evelyn gasped. "Jake, something's happening." Max collapsed. His body glowed fiercely, and then, the light faded ***. Jake fell to his knees, cradling his dog. Max's breath was shallow, his heartbeat slowing. But his eyes, they were brown again. Tears streamed down Jake's face. "You came back, buddy." Max let out one final, soft breath, and nuzzled against Jake's hand. And then, he closed his eyes. The infection was gone. But so was Max. Jake held his best friend in his arms, his chest shaking with silent sobs. Evelyn placed a hand on his shoulder, but no words could fix what had just been lost. Harding stood back, watching with an unreadable expression. Then, he slowly exhaled. "It's over," he murmured. But Jake knew the truth. It would never be over. Because something had changed that night. Something in the forest. Something in the water. And as the wind howled through the trees, carrying a faint, distant echo, Jake could have sworn he heard another howl answering back.